At 17, my adoptive parents disowned me for getting pregnant and refusing to give them my baby. 20 years later, their biological son found me on Facebook. When I was just 4 years old, my world turned upside down after I lost my parents in a tragic car accident. I don't remember much about it, except that one moment I was in the back seat, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital, surrounded by nurses and doctors. Being a child, it was incredibly scary to wake up in such an unfamiliar environment. A CPS worker was sitting by my bedside, gently explaining that my parents had passed away and that I would need to stay with another family for a while. It was so confusing and overwhelming. After that, my life was full of changes. I bounced around different foster homes, but none of them felt like home to me. Then, at the age of 5, I met Lorraine and James. They had been longing for a child of their own, and from the moment I met them, I could feel their warmth and genuine care. They took me in without hesitation, filling the void in my heart and giving me a sense of belonging. I thought I had finally found my second family, but things weren't perfect. I noticed that James was extremely strict, always insisting on discipline and order, while Lorraine seemed to defer to him. Later I learned that James was an Army veteran who had been injured in action, and his military background explained his need for everything to be meticulously planned. Even though I understood why he was the way he was, it didn't make it any easier when he got angry over little things, like being a minute late for church. His strictness made me feel like I was walking on eggshells to avoid his anger. Lorraine, on the other hand, was more relaxed, especially when James wasn't around. I often saw her finish an entire bottle of wine by herself. She seemed sad and lost in her thoughts, rarely asking me about my school or homework. All she did was cook and clean, as James was particular about it. In the beginning, we all got along and there weren't many fights. But as I grew up, I started realizing that James was abusive. James was obsessed with my grades. He would constantly pressure me to perform better and would get angry and slap me if I didn't meet his expectations. He even threatened to send me back to the orphanage, which terrified me, even though it wasn't actually possible. I worked hard to please him just to avoid being sent back. I also noticed that Lorraine and James argued a lot. After their fights, James would drag her into their bedroom, and she would come out with bruises and marks. It took me a while to realize that he was physically assaulting her. I couldn't understand why Lorraine never called the police. After their fights, she would just sit and cry silently while James drank beer and watched TV. I became afraid to be alone around James, but as anyone who has grown up in an abusive family knows, abusers will find any excuse to lash out. As I got older, James's control extended beyond my grades. He became strict about the clothes I wore, the friends I hung out with, and whether any guy was interested in me. He insisted that I come straight home from school, believing that hanging out with friends would be a distraction. Lorraine quietly allowed me to spend an hour with my friends after school, understanding that it was a small opportunity for me to have some normalcy. I cherished those moments with my friends, even if they were fleeting. Things got worse when James lost his job. His frustration and anger intensified, making our home even more abusive. One night, Lorraine had just finished making dinner when James exploded, complaining that it wasn't up to his standards. He yelled and slammed the table, threatening to kick her out if she couldn't cook properly. He threw his plate against the wall as Lorraine and I sat there, terrified. Later, when I ate the food, I didn't find anything wrong with it. James's drinking got worse since he was unemployed and had nothing to do but laze around. The living room was always filled with beer cans, which Lorraine had to clean up. I wasn't able to hang out with my friends anymore, as James would question me if I was even a minute late coming home from school. When I turned 15, a classmate named Harry confessed his feelings for me and asked me out on a date. I was nervous about James finding out, but as a teenager, I wanted to experience what it was like to have a relationship. So, despite feeling really nervous, I agreed to go on a date with Harry to explore my feelings and see where things would go. We met up at this cute little coffee shop after school and spent the whole afternoon talking and really getting to know each other better. Honestly, deciding to go on that date was probably the best choice I've ever made because that's how Harry and I eventually fell in love. He was everything James wasn't. Harry was so gentle and kind to literally everyone, even animals. He'd even save up his pocket money just to bring me my favorite flowers whenever he could. I didn't have a good role model growing up, so I never really expected much from Harry, but he treated me perfectly. On the other hand, James was always super suspicious and kept asking if I was hanging out with other guys. I'd always deny it, secretly praying he wouldn't find out the truth. Thankfully, I wasn't allowed to have a phone, so there were no incriminating texts for him to discover. Harry and I were super careful about our dates and didn't tell our friends we were seeing each other, just to keep it all hush-hush. Harry totally understood how scared I was of James and was okay with keeping our relationship a secret. When prom rolled around, Harry and I decided to go together with our friends to avoid raising any suspicions. But once James heard I wanted to go, he flat out refused. He said prom was a waste of time and wouldn't even buy me a dress. Honestly, I didn't care about the dress. I just wanted to have fun with my friends. I pleaded with James, reminding him that I always got good grades like he wanted, but he just scolded me, saying these friendships wouldn't matter in the long run and that prom wasn't a big deal. He even argued with my guardian, Lorraine, who thought I should be allowed to go. James claimed teenagers didn't know right from wrong and said he wouldn't let me attend prom just to fool around when I could stay home and be safe. No matter how much I tried to reason with him, explaining how important this event was for me, he wouldn't budge. He even threatened to lock me out if I snuck out to go. So, on prom night, I was the only one who didn't go, and I spent the entire night crying alone in my room. I was really getting sick and tired of living under James's rules. After high school ended, it got even harder to see Harry because I wasn't allowed to go out and I still didn't have a phone. I asked James for a phone, but he said I didn't need one at my age. I tried to explain that everyone in college had a phone, but he just said if I wanted one, I should pay for it myself. So I got a part-time job to earn some money and gain a bit of independence. The pay was low, but it let me hang out with Harry more. I'd just tell James I was at work while I was actually meeting Harry. Eventually, I got news that I'd been accepted into an Ivy League university with a full-ride scholarship. This was huge because no one from my town had ever done that before. James took it upon himself to tell everyone how proud he was and boasted about my achievement to anyone who would listen. He never congratulated me properly, but he sure loved bragging about it as if it was his own accomplishment. Following my college acceptance, I probably breathed the biggest sigh of relief in my life. James finally had nothing to complain about since I'd fulfilled his dream by getting into a good college with a scholarship. I was also working, so he couldn't call me lazy anymore. He was so happy that he even agreed to buy me a phone and told me to save the money I'd been earning for college expenses. He also allowed me to hang out with my friends after work for the first time. It felt amazing to finally have some freedom. Harry and I knew we'd be apart once college started, but we promised to meet each other whenever we could. We were intimate a couple of times, always being super careful. But about 2 weeks later, I started experiencing strange symptoms similar to my period, but without actually getting it. I was craving food at random hours and just knew something was off with my body. I panicked and told Harry I needed to take some pregnancy tests. He agreed, and I did 3 tests. All came back positive. I was so shocked I collapsed on the floor, crying. It felt like one of the worst nightmares of my life. Harry tried to comfort me, but I was shaking uncontrollably. I knew James would react terribly if he found out I was pregnant, especially right before college. Harry assured me it was completely my decision and said he'd support me no matter what. He suggested talking to his parents first and then breaking the news to James together so he wouldn't get violent. Harry's parents were so understanding. His mom hugged me and said these things happen, so I shouldn't worry too much. They agreed to come over to my place to help break the news to James. When Lorraine and James found out I was pregnant, they were both stunned. Lorraine asked me twice if I was sure, and I nodded, having taken multiple tests. James exploded in anger, yelling that this was why he never wanted to adopt kids from strangers, because you couldn't guarantee their character. He called me all sorts of terrible names, and it felt like my world was falling apart. I won't repeat the details here, but let's just say James told me I had basically ruined my life. Harry's parents tried to calm him down, but James just flipped out on them, blaming everything on Harry. He looked like he was about to physically attack Harry, who was sitting quietly in the corner. This is when I broke down and told James that I wasn't planning on keeping the pregnancy anyway, so he had nothing to worry about. I reassured him that everything could go back to normal and I'd be heading off to college as planned. That's when Lorraine stepped in and told James they needed to talk privately. They excused themselves, leaving me there crying and fidgeting nervously while Harry's parents looked at me with sympathy. When Lorraine and James came back, Lorraine dropped a bombshell. She said I didn't have to give up the baby. Instead, I could carry the pregnancy to term and then give up my parental rights to them. I was stunned. She said the child was a gift from God and urged us not to consider any other options. James backed her up, saying this arrangement would be best, especially since Lorraine was already pregnant herself. I was utterly confused. James explained that they had just found out a week ago that Lorraine was expecting, but they hadn't told anyone because they were still processing it. Now, with me being pregnant too, they thought they could raise both kids as siblings. The shock of their idea left me speechless. Harry's parents were equally stunned and immediately said they didn't agree with the plan, but James cut them off, saying it wasn't their decision to make. He looked at me, waiting for an answer. I was so nervous, but deep down, I knew I couldn't agree to this. I couldn't bear the thought of giving up my child to be raised in the environment I grew up in with them. While Lorraine had her moments of being a caring mother, she couldn't protect herself from James, let alone guarantee my child's safety. As much as I cherished the idea of being a mother one day, I knew the timing and circumstances weren't right. I couldn't bring a child into the world knowing I couldn't ensure their safety and well-being. So, I firmly told James that, although I was happy they were expecting a sibling for me, I couldn't go through with my pregnancy as I wasn't mentally or physically strong enough. More importantly, I couldn't imagine watching my child grow up thinking they were just another sibling. Lorraine started crying when she heard my decision, saying how disappointed she was that I couldn't do this for her after all she had sacrificed for me. James got really angry and started pacing around the room. I tried to explain, but they refused to understand. Harry's mom chimed in, saying she agreed with my decision and could help make an appointment with a gynecologist to proceed with the next step. This made Lorraine cry even harder, and James yelled, asking if I was happy now that I had hurt her so much. He then told me to pack my things and leave the house. In shock, I quickly went upstairs to grab important documents, photo albums, and whatever clothes I could. When I came back downstairs, James warned me to take everything I could because he planned to burn the rest of my stuff the next day. I tried talking to Lorraine, but she refused to even look at me. James told me never to come back again. I couldn't understand what I had done to deserve being disowned so cruelly. I left with Harry and his parents, who kindly offered me a place to stay. The next few days were a blur. Harry's parents took me to the gynecologist, and we made an appointment for the procedure. It was a tough decision for Harry and me, but we knew it was the best choice for our futures. After the procedure, I spent the next few days recovering, and Harry didn't leave my side once. He and his parents were so kind and took great care of me. Throughout all this, James and Lorraine never contacted me. When it was time to move into my college dorm, I texted James, hoping he had forgiven me. However, he replied, calling me a failure and a disappointment, and said he wanted nothing to do with me. His words hurt deeply, and I cried for hours. They were the only parents I knew, and now they had cut me off completely. College was tough but rewarding. I had to work part-time and study hard to maintain my grades, but I was determined to succeed. Thankfully, Harry stuck by me through it all, visiting whenever he could. His unwavering support kept me going, even when things got tough. During holidays, his parents often invited me to spend time with them, and they started to feel more like my real family. I graduated with honors, and Harry and his parents were there to cheer me on. After my graduation ceremony, which was a huge milestone for me, I landed a cushy job in my field. I felt incredibly proud, knowing that all my hard work had finally paid off. Eventually, Harry and I decided it was time to move in together. As the days turned into years, our relationship only got stronger. We became each other's biggest supporters through all the ups and downs that life threw at us. After several years of being together, we decided to take the next big step and tie the knot. Our wedding day was nothing short of magical. It was a beautiful celebration filled with love and commitment, surrounded by our closest friends and family. Honestly, inviting James and Lorraine to the wedding didn't even cross my mind. As a married couple, Harry and I continued to build our life together. Recently, we took a big leap and bought another house while renting out our previous home. This new place has become our cozy sanctuary, a spot where we can create new memories and plan for the future. One of the main reasons we decided to buy this second place was to be closer to Harry's aging parents. They've sort of become my parents too, and I want to take care of them in any way I can. It's been almost 20 years since I was kicked out by James and Lorraine, and honestly, I hardly think about them anymore. There was a time, though, during my first year of college, when I spent a lot of nights crying and missing them. But by my second year, I realized this was my chance to build a new life, free from their rejection. I forced myself to stop thinking about them, even though it hurt a lot. It took immense strength to build this life on my own, especially since they never tried to reach out, and I didn't bother checking in with them either. Harry has been my rock through all of this. He's been my partner in every sense of the word. We don't have children, but we do have 2 dogs that we absolutely adore. We visit Harry's parents every other weekend, and we love going on trips and trying out new restaurants together. Looking back, I can say my life has turned out pretty well. I wish I could go back and hug my 17-year-old self, reassuring her that everything would be okay. Recently, I got a friend request on Facebook from someone named Matt, who had a very familiar last name. When I checked his profile, I was almost jolted in surprise because he looked eerily similar to James. I accepted his request, and he sent me a message saying hello, so I replied back. He then asked if I knew anyone named James and Lorraine, and that's when it clicked. He was their son. I felt a mix of nerves and curiosity, but decided to be honest. I told him that I indeed knew them since they had adopted me when I was 5 years old. Matt seemed really excited and wanted to talk more, so I gave him my number. When he called, it was super awkward at first, but Matt started chatting about how he always knew his parents had another child. He had seen my pictures in their family album but never got any answers from them. He told me he had been searching for me for a long time, ever since he found out my name from people back in our hometown. By some stroke of luck, he stumbled upon my profile recently. He said he just wanted to know the truth, which left me feeling conflicted, but ultimately, I knew I had to be honest with him. With a heavy heart, I recounted the painful events of my past, including how his parents asked me to give up my child for them and kicked me out when I refused. I didn't hold back any details, sharing how they had been absent from my life and how I had survived thanks to the kindness and support of Harry's parents. It was a tough conversation, filled with raw emotion and long-buried memories. Matt listened intently, absorbing every word. When I finished, there was a heavy silence on his end. After a moment, Matt said he had no idea his parents had treated me so cruelly. He had always thought I had run away because that's what they told everyone. He thanked me for my honesty and apologized on behalf of his parents, expressing sincere regret for the pain they caused me. After our conversation, I felt grateful that Matt had made the effort to reach out. His understanding and support brought me a sense of comfort and validation. However, I couldn't shake the worry about what James and Lorraine would do once they found out. Had I done the right thing by telling Matt the truth, or should I have kept my mouth shut? Just 24 hours later, my worries were confirmed. I started receiving multiple calls and texts from James and Lorraine. I never changed my number, so it was easy for them to find me. They sent a barrage of messages, calling me names and accusing me of betraying their trust. James even said I should have kept my mouth shut and not come between him and his son. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure of how to respond, I've been avoiding their calls and messages. I'm really lost on how to navigate this unexpected confrontation. I told Harry everything that had happened. He wasn't aware that Matt had reached out to me, and when he found out I had spilled the beans, he thought I shouldn't have done that. So it wasn't really about thinking that telling the truth was the wrong move. The thing is, he figured James was totally off the rails, and spilling the beans would just bring a whole lot of unnecessary drama into our lives. I chatted with Matt about everything, and he told me that right after our discussion he confronted James and Lorraine. Of course, they tried to deny everything and painted me as a liar and a selfish person who just used them until I could escape to college. But Matt didn't buy any of it, and told them to stay away from his kids. He also let them know he was cutting them off financially. Then Matt shared that he and his wife had recently adopted twins. Apparently, James and Lorraine weren't too thrilled about it and hadn't even bothered to visit the kids. This had made him question their behavior, but they blew off his concerns. After finding out the truth from me, he finally understood why they weren't happy about his adoptions. He assured me he had no idea they would lash out at me and promised to tell them to back off. He even invited me to visit his twins whenever I had time, saying that no matter how his parents treated me, he still wanted to get to know me since we are, after all, siblings. Honestly, after talking with Matt, I felt a lot better. I was really surprised by how sweet he is and how different he is from James and Lorraine. I'm seriously considering taking him up on his offer and visiting his kids with my husband soon. Update 3. It's been 7 months since my last update, and since some of you asked for more news, here it is. I decided to block James and Lorraine on all communication channels, so no more nasty messages from them. Plus, Matt had a talk with them, so I'm sure they had no choice but to back off. Over the past few months, Harry and I have visited Matt and his wife at least 4 times. They've been incredibly welcoming each time. We've spent hours catching up, sharing stories, and bonding over our childhood experiences. During these visits, I've had the chance to hang out with Matt's twins, who are absolute bundles of joy. I'm genuinely grateful that Matt reached out to me, and I'm really happy about the new connection with him and his family. It's been a huge part of my healing process from the old wounds of the past.